Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And today we are talking about Smile 2. Here's what I will say right off the bat. If you are a fan of the first film, you are probably going to like Smile 2. This is a sequel that does not deviate that much from the narrative plot points of the first film. I would say it takes those plot points and definitely elevates them. This is definitely a bigger movie. You could tell they probably got a bigger budget for this one. It felt gorier than the first film as well, so there's definitely a lot of special effects work going on here, and very much keeping within the same themes that the first film had. Now, if you are someone that wasn't that big a fan of the first film, I don't think this one is going to change your opinions on these films, just because, again, it does follow a very similar narrative structure. I will say personally, for me, I actually really enjoy these movies. I really liked part one, and I thought part two was even better. I had way more fun of a time watching part two, and that might be because I was lucky enough to catch an early screening of this with a full house of horror fans who were just like jumping and screaming and reacting to everything on screen. So it was just a very fun viewing experience. But I do think there are a lot of positives to talk about this film, which I will get into over the course of this video. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers for this one. I would say if you're interested in seeing this, go out to a theater and catch a screening of it. I actually saw the first film a few days ago. When the first Smile came out in 2022, I remember not thinking that much of it from the previews. I remember thinking like, okay, like what is this? People are smiling. Like it looked like just some kind of cheap Blumhouse schlock. So I never went to go see it in theaters, and then it became this huge like commercial hit, this huge like critical darling, and many people that I'm friends with who love the horror genre were telling me like, hey, this is a really great film. But it was still just like one of those films that I never got around to seeing, and with the sequel coming out, I was like, okay, I finally gotta like sit down and watch this. And I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed the first film. I know that people who weren't that big on Smile tend to criticize it as a just kind of unnecessary rehashing of something like It Follows, which I can definitely see. There's definitely flavors of It Follows in the original Smile. However, I would also argue that you can find flavors of other horror films in there as well. I don't think it's just repeating It Follows. Watching it, I saw a lot of like Ari Aster, where you're having this like drone shot that's like going over this landscape and the camera's like flipping upside down. Like that reminded me of a shot that's very similar in Midsommar. But a lot of it actually just reminded me of these films that came out in the early mid 2000s that I think probably started with the success of The American Ring, in which you have a character that comes across some sort of curse, either in the form of videotape or some other type of object, and then they have a set amount of time to figure out what this curse is, what is happening to them, and try to solve the mystery before the curse kills them. The investigate your horror as I sometimes call it. So Smile was definitely giving me like the vibes of that, and it was kind of fun just getting to see like a decent sized budget studio film exploring this kind of narrative again. So to me, the original film just really felt like one big love letter to that specific subgenre of horror. And yeah, I was really impressed with the narrative of the film. I was really impressed with the themes that it was exploring. I liked the idea that you're having this monster, this curse that is feeding off of, yes, your trauma, but I would say even more so an entity that is feeding off all of the self-doubt, self-criticisms, negative self-beliefs that one has about themselves. In both the first film as well in the second film, you have characters that genuinely believe that they are horrible people because of decisions that they chose to make in their past. And I feel like that's something that we can all relate to. Just the idea of getting into these repetitive cycles of like negative thinking, negative self-talk, and having negative beliefs about yourself yourself and all the anxieties and depressions that can come with that. Like, that's a pretty universal experience. So it's not surprising to me that a film like Smile would resonate with people in the way that it did. And on a technical level, I just thought the first film was really well made. A lot of really great camera choices and placements. I mean, the sound design alone, like you also get in the second film, but just that like eerie music that creeps in at certain points and it just like crawls under your skin. Like, kudos to whoever is doing the music and the sound design in these films. And what I also thought was fascinating about the entity in the first film is this idea that in order for it to pass from one person to the next, spoilers if you haven't seen the first film, when it's forcing someone to kill themselves, it needs an audience for that, right? It needs someone watching, right? The only way that trauma can get passed on is through the act of looking, which I find very fascinating. And again, it feels very relevant for today's times in which, I mean, I think this started with reality TV, but now we definitely see it all the time with social media where people are just using their own personal profiles or their own personal platforms to share sometimes negative things. You know, the whole phenomenon of like doom scrolling on social media or just being really caught up in the spectacle of someone's like mental breakdown online. We've seen like cases of this and we know that being a witness to that and constantly consuming that is not great for our own mental health. And I think the second film is taking this concept and just bringing it to another level with the fact that now we have a pop star, we have an entertainer, and one thing that the second film makes known right at the beginning is that this is a pop star who has had a lot of trouble with substance abuse and mental health issues, and that these personal struggles that she's been going through has been documented by the media and used as, again, entertainment. And you know, her pain has become a commodified product for people to consume. And so the film is even commenting on like this phenomenon that we do see with like celebrities or just like well-known people in pop culture. We like to build them up to tear them down, and then we love to see a good redemption arc. And so I think Smile 2 has that component to it. And it's also just fascinating to be in this world of the pop star, especially considering obviously this film was already like well made and probably in post-production by, you know, this summer, but we've been seeing over the past few months this kind of rise in the pop star, right? Whether it's the Sabrina Carpenters or the Chappell Roans, Charlie XCX. Obviously, you have huge phenomenons like the Taylor Swifts, and just how kind of interesting it is that a lot of these pop stars are either making music talking about their anxieties and depressions and just the pressure that's on them to still perform and seem happy and right, get on stage and smile even when they're feeling miserable, or you're seeing them making commentary about how hard it is to live this life in the spotlight where everyone is, again, just kind of like waiting for you to make the wrong move. And I think it's also relevant that a film with these kinds of themes that's dealing with things like anxieties, depressions, just not knowing, you know, what is actually reality, you know, it feels pretty fitting, especially if you're in the US and we have a very contentious election happening here. So again, I'm saying all of this, but I do want to make it clear, like, it's not like the film is having these overt political messages by any means. It is not like trying to shove any messages down your throat. These are all things that I just noticed watching both part 1 and part 2 recently. I do think they are films that are just tapping into the cultural zeitgeist right now in many different ways. And I do think that is playing a role in just their overall popularity and why it feels so easy to relate to the characters in these films. That was a rant, but these are like the things that I love to geek out on when it comes to horror films. As I said, I think Smile 2 is even bigger and better than the first film. Whereas with the first film, you know, it was fairly contained in terms of its locations. I think it's like what you have the hospital setting where the protagonist works, and then we're mostly seeing her at home, whereas this film is definitely expanding. It feels like we're following this character in these different types of locations, which is really interesting. And I really love that this film chose to go with like the pop star route. Thinking of a sequel for Smile 2 following a pop star would not be the thing that I immediately think of for a sequel. But I like that this one just like completely throws us into a new world. And again, I think because it's a world that maybe we wouldn't be expecting, I think that definitely ups the anxieties, because you're not really sure like what to expect or when things are going to pop out and scare you. So I just had a lot of fun being in that world with this character. And I actually thought they did a really great job with the sets and the whole like her performing and being on stage with the costumes and the dancers. There's a few scenes in here where they're showing like choreographed dancing, and it's very well done. At times it was giving me vibes of like Suspiria. And you have these dance sequences in which you have Skye, who is the protagonist of the film, who is in the middle of these like dance sequences, and the dancers are like, you know, they're around her and they're like covering her with their like bodies or their movements, or they're picking her up and kind of twirling her. The dances are very much mirroring what she's feeling inside. Even before she gets the smile curse, she's already very much feeling like she's just kind of in this whirlwind. So I loved that they, you know, mirrored the dancing and the music to what the character was actually going through and to the themes of the film. There's a very cool scene later on in the movie. The dancers come into play, and it's a very unique sequence. You see like bits and pieces of it in the trailer, and I remember seeing it from the trailer. I was like, I don't know if that's gonna like work or if it's just gonna look kind of goofy, but seeing it within the film and within the actual context of the scene, I thought it was actually very cool. There are definitely a lot of creepy moments in this movie, and listen, you know, I've been watching horror films since I was a kid. It takes a lot to like freak me out or creep me out, but there were moments in here where stuff's happening, the monster's showing up, and I was just like, oh. I will say that, you know, this is a film that does have a lot of jump scares in it. There are some pretty frequent jump scare moments. And I've said before, I'm not the biggest fan of jump scares. I do think when used poorly, they're just these kind of cheap tricks that don't really do much. But I do think that the jump scares in Smile 2 worked well. And I counted 4. There were 4 times where the film actually got me and caused me to jump. Even though I was kind of expecting them to do a jump scare, this still got me. And what I loved about this film is the way that it builds tension. Like, there are times where we're with Skye in her apartment and she'll turn the corner, and then there'll be just some shadowy figure down this long hallway, right? And you're just getting this like long shot down the hallway, and you're just seeing this figure like standing there, and all the music like goes away, right? They don't use any stingers in that part. They just like let the scene be and breathe, and yeah, it just builds that anxiety so well, because you're just like sitting there like, oh god, what is gonna happen? So for me, I did find a lot of the scares effective. I did find a lot of the imagery to be very creepy. Again, slight spoiler if you have not seen the first film, but if you are a fan of the first film and you really enjoy the odd creature designs at the end of that movie, you do get that in this film as well. And again, just on a very bigger, and it felt gorier scale. One thing that I was very surprised by in this movie that I was not expecting was the level of body horror that we get. Now, when I say body horror, I'm not really talking about something on the level of like The Substance, nor is it like the over-the-top gory that you would get from one of the Terrifier films, but it's still very like effective. You're still getting a lot of scenes of people's heads getting bashed in, of people, you know, just ripping apart chests and stomachs and things coming out of those orifices. You know, some of it we've like seen before, where it's like you have a character that gets injured in some way, right? Like they, let's say, hurt their leg, and you see like bones like sticking out, like, you know, we've seen these kinds of things before, but that doesn't make it any less cringy when you do see it. I know the first film had its moments. The second film really felt like proper like horror film. Like, this is what you go to a horror film for, is to see like this kind of gore right here. Like the use of camera angles and camera movements in here, I thought they did a lot of very creative stuff in this film. And again, it felt like they were definitely more willing to experiment with this one than they were in the first film. But you just get some really like creative scenes. Like the opening scene, again, I don't want to like spoil anything or say what happens, but the opening scene, I believe, I might be wrong about this, there's a portion in the opening scene where you're following a character, and I want to say it's a 2 or 3 minute just like continuous shot. I don't think they cut in this moment. They might not have done a cut throughout the whole opening. It might have just been like one continuous shot following this character. But that was really cool to see because, again, the camera has movement to it. There's a kineticness to it. It feels like frantic. And it's a really great way to just kind of dump you back into this world. And then the other shot that stuck out in my mind is there's a scene where you're having two characters that are in a car and they're having an argument with each other. And they must have had the camera on some sort of like swivel device, because as the scene's going on and as these characters are arguing with each other, you just see the camera, like it does these like quick pans like back and forth. It just swivels to like one character's face and they're arguing, and then it like immediately swivels back to the other character and to see them arguing. And again, they're in a car and they're not paying attention to the road and they're arguing at each other, and the camera's just again doing these very quick like movements back and forth. And to me that was so anxiety inducing. I was like, you know something bad is going to happen by the end of the scene and you're just like sitting there waiting for it. And this film, very similar to the first film, like it just does these extreme close-ups on people's faces, so there's also this like claustrophobic element that is being added into it. I thought this film was very creative on a technical level. Just the use of like space and location where you can just tell that something like feels slightly off, but you can't like quite put your finger on what it is. And then that leads to questions around like, okay, is what I'm seeing real? Is this all an illusion created by this like demon entity? And again, the sound design is amazing. That eerie music is coming back in. If you're someone that got like super creeped out by all the weird noises in the end credits of the first film, stick around for the end credits in this new film because you get plenty of that again. It was funny getting to see this one with an audience because we were able to get a preview screening at the art house theater that I work at, and our theater tends to cater to a lot of the college students that are in the area, which I think is why the studio chose us to show the film. We usually don't get these kinds of movies, but it was hilarious because obviously I had to stick around for the end credits, and just seeing people leaving and then having all that like eerie music coming in and like these muffled screams, and like you could just see the audience like looking back at the screen being like, what the hell? So again, the way that this film knows when to use sound and when not to use sound, when to just take it away completely, it's very well done, and it does definitely add to just the overall anxiety inducing feel that this film is trying to give you. I also really enjoyed Naomi Scott's performance here. I'm not familiar with her other work. She's probably been in other stuff that I've seen and just didn't make the connection, but I really enjoyed watching her. She has really great screen presence. I'm not sure if she's an actual singer in real life, but she does have moments where she is singing and playing the piano. And I just think she did a great job of portraying this pop star that, you know, went through this very traumatic thing and is trying to get their life back together, but is having like all of these like pressures put on her. You know, she has the classic like stage mom, the mom who is also the manager and is always like telling her what to do, and they have a kind of contentious relationship. But there's also these moments where, and you do get this in the first film as well, right, where you're having the protagonist in some sort of social situation and things just go from like bad to worse the longer that the scene goes on. Obviously you have like that birthday party scene in the first film. Here there's a scene where she has to go make a speech in front of this like youth organization talking about the power of music, and obviously the entity is messing with her head, and she's just like making this like super cringy speech. These moments that are not scary but are still just very anxiety inducing and cringe inducing, and you're just sitting there like, oh my god, please stop. She's also got like lipstick smeared all over her face and her hair's all messed up, and again she just plays with that so well. Her character also has like this thing, it's like one of those nervous tics, like, you know, when you like bite your nails. For her it's like pulling out her hair, and so you just have these like scenes of her getting really like anxious and amped up, and she's just like starts pulling out chunks of her hair. And again, the sound design is like coming in strong here, so you can just like hear that like ripping of the hair follicles. It's like, oh. But she does a great job of really creating a character that you can root for throughout the film. She's not like a typical like final girl in the sense of how we think of it in a slasher, but as far as like horror female protagonists go, she's been one of my favorites that I've seen this year. I will say, because I know there was some chatter going on before this movie came out that this film would get more into the lore of whatever this demon is, give more answers. In some ways I would say it does. again, I do think you get more of a sense of just how much it can manipulate someone and how much it can manipulate their worldview and their reality. However, you know, I wouldn't say that it's giving like clear-cut answers and being like, yep, this is what this entity is, this is how you stop it. It's definitely keeping some of the mystery, and, you know, I feel like it does kind of have to in order to keep this premise like going. Like, I do feel like this might be one of these things where if you get too in the weeds with it, it might start to not make sense. That being said, you know, if they are going to continue these films, and I don't see why they wouldn't if the second film is going to be successful, I would like to get a little bit more into the lore of this demon, because like I said, they give you a little bit here, but in some cases it's just kind of a rehashing of the information that you already know from the first movie. And here's where I'll get into what is probably my biggest critique of this film. As I said, overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I had a lot of fun watching it. My only criticism is that by the second part of the film, the story tends to reuse similar narrative beats that we got in the first film. In terms of, you know, for example, a reliance on flashbacks, right? Flashing back to whatever previous childhood trauma or whatever like previous trauma the character experienced before they came infected with the smile demon or virus or whatever it is. So when watching these scenes in the theater, I was like, okay, I can probably guess how this is going to go and how this is going to end, because it does feel very similar to what happened in the first film. And then that's what happened. Like, the exact same thing that happened in the first film would happen in this movie as well. I see what it's trying to do. I think it's trying to set up a pattern with this demon where it's like, okay, once you get infected with this thing, this is how it breaks you down, right? So I get that they're trying to establish a pattern here, but some of the scenes just felt a bit repetitive of what we saw of the first film. My hope would be for the next one that they do kind of deviate from the formula a little bit and try something new, you know, maybe get a different kind of character that we're following. What does that look like for people in different like cultures? Different cultures have different ways of understanding things like anxiety and depression. I think it would be really fascinating to just see a different like perspective in one of these films, someone that has a different cultural background and how they're understanding what's happening to them. It might also be interesting to see like what happens when two people get infected at the same time. Like, can this entity infect multiple people at once? And if so, what does that look like if you have like two people that are dealing with it at the same time, right? I mean, like, trauma bonding is a real thing. They could explore that in one of these movies. And yeah, I'm actually excited to see where they take this series. I've enjoyed both films enough that this is one of the like rare occurrences where I'm just like, yeah, give me another one. I feel like with this series and then like the Terrifier films, like, it feels really exciting to be having these horror franchises that are coming out that people are really excited about, that are very entertaining, and that are creating these new like iconic horror villains and horror beings. Like, it feels very exciting to be in a time where we're getting to experience the rise and the birth of these new horror series, horror franchises, and things that are like actually new and not just like a requel of something else. So those are my thoughts on Smile 2. Again, really enjoyed it. Have you seen this film? What did you think about it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.